This is a guide to TKW, or the Toolkit Workbench. Toolkit Workbench, or TKW, was built for ITK, the Interoperability Toolkit, message testing. This was done to provide a reference counterparty for ITK to establish authoritative behaviours, as opposed to the singular implementation of Spine. It was done to reduce the risk of interoperability failures between client and middleware providers, and to produce test evidence for suppliers' accreditation submissions. Its functionality has been expanded to include Spine messaging support for validation and is intended to replace older tools such as OMVT2 and MTH. It works in three basic modes: message transmission, host simulation, and message validation. It can be downloaded at this web address. The TKW installer first requires us to give a directory to install to. Here I've set up a directory in my C drive. Within the installation options, we can select one or more of the configurations. These are each of the domains, both ITK and Spine, and one or more of the contrib directories. These contain things like test messages, additional tools, etc. There's a checkbox there so that you can optionally install the tkw.jar file. I've selected all as a default. Once the installation is complete, we can have a look at the directory structure. Here underneath the directory which I gave TKW installer, we have the TKW directory, underneath which we have the tkw.jar Java binary. We have the release notes. These show the release history, including bugs fixed, etc. The Toolkit Workbench guide, and also the README file, which describes the modes available for each of the configs. We open up the config directory. Each domain has the same directory structure, and the config directory contains all of the configurations for each of the supported domains. So if we open up, for example, correspondence, within here we have a certs repository for storing certificates. We have a logs directory where logs are written automatically and can be used for debugging or as part of the evidence submitted to the ITK accreditation team. We have the simulator config. This contains rule sets and templates for use in simulator mode. We have the simulator saved messages directory, which contains logs of messages received and sent from the simulator. The transmitter sent message. This directory contains logs of messages sent from the transmitter and received back to it. We have the transmitter source, where messages are placed to be sent using the transmitter. The messages for validation directory is where messages are placed to be validated. The validator config contains rule sets and templates for use of the validator. The validator reports directory contains logs of messages validated, and the TKW properties file. This file is the main configuration file for each of the domains and contains all of the configurations needed to set up the functions of all the TKW modes. Within this file you can see we have configuration values for things such as trust stores and key stores. We have listen ports for the simulator. Further down we have transmitter send URLs. and directory definitions. Very little of this will need to be set up, as most of it will be OK from out of the box. If we now look at the contrib directory, within the additional tools we have a pipe and hat converter. This converts pipe and hat to and from XML. We have Visual Validator. This is a standalone .NET application for execution of ITK or spine message validations using TKW in a drag and drop GUI interface. This is something which would need to be installed. The test certificates directory is used for TLS mutual authentication. A guide is available on the configuration of the systems for TLS MA. There are test message directories there for both ITK and spine, and there's a directory for the TKW Auto Test Manager. The auto test software provides the ability to execute multiple tests consecutively against a system under test and provides reports of all the results. There's also another Screencast which covers this software. Finally, we have the lib directory. This contains libraries which the tkw.jar relies on. TKW is executed on the command line using optional arguments to run in one of a number of modes. The first mode we'll look at is simulator mode. In simulator mode, the TKW test bench will respond to incoming messages from the requesting system under test and will respond based upon a set of behaviour rules. TKW is supplied with rule set designed for the purpose of producing ITK accreditation evidence for systems which operate in client mode. The simulator mode supports TLS-MA, synchronous and asynchronous response, queue collection, routing and pipe and hat. In transmitter mode, TKW will transmit multiple messages to a host system using the properties in TKW properties file, which I showed you earlier. It can operate for synchronous messaging, and if asynchronous message collection is required, a further instance of TKW can be instantiated for this purpose. The final mode TKW can work in is validation. Validation mode will validate multiple message files against a set of validation rules. It can validate messaging against specification documents, i.e. schemas, domain MIM, spine MIM, EIS and domain-specific requirements. It produces HTML reports per message with pass-fail and references to issues. It uses schemas, XPath and XSLT expressions. In the second screencast, I will demonstrate how TKW can transmit and receive messages and validate those messages which have been sent.